Well, welcome everyone. Welcome to the Caregiving Wisdom Series. I'm Deb Kelsey Davis, and with me is Kelly Johnson. And together we're the co-founders of Nourish for Caregivers. And we're really super excited that you're here tonight. When we talk about caregiving wisdom, and especially the person that we have with us this evening, wisdom really comes from caregiving. You're all experts and you all have a tremendous amount of wisdom to share. And tonight we're incredibly blessed to have Kendra Webster with us as our presenter. We're going to spend some time though before we formally introduce Kendra, just reminding everyone, again, we're going to use that chat box that you've all been entering your sort of hellos and where you're from in. We're going to be using that chat box to capture your questions as they arise, or maybe comments that come up. Because at the very end, what we're going to do is we're going to come back to your questions. We're going to come back to your thoughts, and we're going to give Kendra an opportunity to interact with you and answer those questions. So we know your time's precious. I know we've got an hour, and we certainly appreciate that. We promise not to go over, but we will, if there are questions, stay over to answer those. So we hope tonight you find it both spiritually nourishing and filled with a tremendous amount of wonderful nuggets that you can take with you into your caregiving. But as we always do, we start with positioning ourselves in a place of peace and prayer.
And after that whirlwind introduction, let's just take a moment to quiet ourselves and place ourselves in the presence of the Lord. Take a deep breath. Heavenly Father, I care because you called me to care. Yes, you called me and you have equipped me in more ways than I can possibly count. I am grateful to you for this honor, this gift of caring for my loved one. I am exhausted with all the responsibilities I carry. I worry. I struggle to find balance in my life. Help me to turn to you, Lord, with all that steals my serenity and place it all into your hands. Help me to see my caregiving as you do. Give me the ability to see the glimpses of beauty that I am in all that I do. Help me to see the purpose in what I encounter each and every day. Cultivate in me the ability to find meaning in my caregiving role. Help me to grow in self-awareness. Nurture me. Fill my soul with an abundance of hope and gratitude that can only come from you. Amen.
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 Thank you so much, Kelly.
And that beautiful artwork that you saw in that, I should have said before we began, is Kendra's. So it's just absolutely gorgeous. Absolutely gorgeous. Beautiful reflection.
So we've been mentioning Kendra's name. How about we introduce you? So let me introduce you to Kendra Webster. So Kendra has her MSW in social work. She's worked with families in numerous different settings since graduating from the University of Michigan School of Social Work in 1997. You've been doing this for quite a while, Kendra. Her initial work began with adults and students with disabilities at the Ann Arbor Center for Independent Living, and that really has shaped her personal philosophy of empowering individuals to be their personal best in a way that they define and personalize for themselves. Kendra moved to California. Lucky you, Kendra. Big shift from Michigan to California. In June of 2000, and began working with unpaid family caregivers for loved ones with physical cognitive impairments. Little did she know that her own grandmother would be diagnosed with Alzheimer's disease just a few years later. As Kendra honed her professional skills and helped her family navigate the many transitions in her grandmother's life, it became clear that the health and well-being of the caregiver is equally as important as the health of their loved one. Kendra's 20 plus year career has given her a very wide ranging experience, including roles in hospitals, nonprofit organizations, hospice, and even the public school system, Kendra. I didn't realize that. From Ann Arbor to San Francisco to Santa Barbara, Kendra's mission is to bring sensitivity, warmth, compassion, and hope to family caregivers. And I've known Kendra now for several years, and I can attest to the fact she does all of those things well. So welcome, Kendra.
Thank you, Deb and Kelly, so much for inviting me to join this beautifully named Wisdom Series, the Caregiving Wisdom Series. It's just such an incredible honor to be here and to, be in the midst of people that I have such respect for. And I shared this with Deb and Kelly. Really, the experts on caregiving are caregivers. And so the wisdom isn't just with the three of us who are spotlighted on the camera, but really with everybody who's on this call. The people who day in and day out have stepped in and stepped up and said, I will care for you, and I will take this and make meaning from it. And that's a little bit of what I am looking forward to talking to you about tonight. So I titled this presentation, Cultivating Meaning in Your Family Caregiving Role, because I find that to be an especially important way to approach caregiving. You may or may not know the average caregiving experience is anywhere from 5 to 15 years. That's a pretty long time to be caring for another person. And that's with everything else that's going on in your world in terms of work and other relationships and caring for a spouse or children or pets or your home or that kind of thing. So finding meaning in that role is something that evolves over time, and something that I hope we can delve a little bit deeper in tonight, and maybe just look at some ways to keep that so it's sustainable throughout your time as a caregiver. Moving ahead. So Deb mentioned that I've worked in a number of settings, and one of the most meaningful work experiences that I've had has been with the California Caregiver Resource Center system. There's a network of 11 caregiver resource centers across the state of California. We're the only state in the country, in fact, to have this dedicated system to caregivers. And it started in San Francisco, somewhere around 35 years ago. And these 11 centers have really developed services fairly specific to caregivers caring for loved ones with dementia, but then also Parkinson's disease and multiple sclerosis, and just various things that kind of pop up on the usually in the neurological arena. So with the Caregiver Resource Center system, I've actually seen a lot of changes over the past 20 years. My first job was in 2001 as a family consultant. And at that time, you really couldn't diagnose dementia specifically. It had to be diagnosed through an autopsy. And right now, we're lucky to have the technology where those things can be diagnosed and really started to be treated right away through MRIs and that kind of thing. So I think we're fairly lucky with the technological advances that I've certainly seen in the past 20 years. So as I was thinking about that, and it just kind of occurred to me this morning, we've advanced our systems to diagnose dementia, and we're able to do that. And I really think it's time to advance the systems to also care for the caregivers. And I think we're starting to see that more and more. But I would really like to see that technology evolve to also include the family members who are caring for their loved ones as well. So pictured here, you see one of my favorite people of all time. This is my grandma Hopper. She was my best friend growing up. She lived down the street. We just had a lot of fun together, and we became very close. And I did something that I think a lot of caregivers that I've met have done. My grandma was a volunteer at the local hospital, and the hospital was connected to the skilled nursing facility. And she would say to me, I don't ever want to go to a skilled nursing facility. I said, oh, Grandma, you're not going to end up in a skilled nursing facility. That's not going to happen. Well, Fast forward, I had moved to California. And I moved to California in 2000, and it was around 2004, 2005 that my mom started to notice she was concerned about my grandmother, perhaps not taking medications on time, different kinds of things she seemed to be forgetting that were odd. And then she ended up falling and breaking her hip. And luckily she had gotten an emergency response system, and we were able to get her care and into surgery pretty soon after she fell. But as it happens in a lot of situations, that hip surgery really exacerbated some of the memory issues. And as she went through rehab, it became apparent that she really wasn't going to be safe going home. And I will say something about my grandmother that I hadn't counted on when I made that long ago promise. My grandma wasn't somebody that you could say, hey, grandma, it's not safe for you to use the stairs. It's not safe for you to carry a heavy basket of laundry, especially up and down the stairs, and have her not do it. She was somebody that once she wanted to have whatever it was done, whether it was her laundry or moving furniture or whatever, she wanted to do it right then and there. And so we quickly realized that sending her home to a house that had a basement where her laundry was wasn't going to be safe for her. And so very reluctantly, we moved her to first an assisted living facility. And then, as her memory declined, and then unfortunately, she also broke her other hip. So her physical functioning also declined. We ended up moving her into a skilled nursing facility and then eventually onto hospice. Um, it, it, it was a very challenging time, but I'm also very grateful to the many caregivers that I've met throughout my career that helped me understand some of the things going on with her, but also some of the things going on with me. And so tonight, my talk is dedicated to my grandmother and to all those caregivers who helped inform me to be a better long distance caregiver to her and to help my mom. I wanted to, before I go into my presentation, kind of identify some of those core beliefs that Deb spoke about that I gained starting really at the Center for Independent Living in Ann Arbor. And these are my core beliefs, both as a professional, as a social worker, and as somebody working with caregivers. The first one, I truly believe that everyone has their own answers that work for them. And so you'll hear a lot of tips, and you might read a lot of books, and you might see things on the news or on social media. Some of those things are going to work for you and some of them aren't. But I truly believe whatever you need to know for you lives inside of you, and that you can and will discover that. And kind of going along with that, the answers for today may not be the answers for tomorrow. I'm kind of new to Zoom presentations, but if you were in the room with me, I'd be asking folks to kind of raise their hand saying, is there something that you tried as a caregiver yesterday that didn't work today? And I'm guessing I'd see some folks raising their hands on that. The answers come and go. The things that work today may not work tomorrow. And so really kind of being open to that evolution over time of what's going to work for you and what's not. And those are things that are very important to me. Just as a professional, as someone working with caregivers, knowing that the situation is always fluid. So just wanted to share that. A little bit of what I'm going to cover tonight is going to include what does cultivating mean? And what I want to share about that is that I really toyed with, as I wrote this presentation, I really toyed with the words making meaning or finding meaning, and it just didn't fit. Finding meaning didn't fit. And I thought, it finally dawned on me, I haven't met a single caregiver who couldn't find meaning in their caregiving role. Of course, it's meaningful to care for your spouse or your child or your parent or your close family friend. It's not that it's not meaningful, but how do you continue to cultivate that meaning over time? A meaning that's like a flower bed where the flowers have a cycle of life all of their own. And so you plant the bulbs in the fall, knowing that the flowers are going to come up in the spring. Meaning is like that, where you're kind of constantly planting those seeds of meaning and cultivating it over time. Exploring the purpose behind cultivating meaning. I'm going to talk a little bit about why this topic is important to me. I'm also going to differentiate meaning from self-care, and I'm going to talk about why that's important. And then finally, reflect together on some ways to cultivate meaning for your own life. I'm really hoping that anyone listening to this presentation can walk away with some concrete steps that they can take, or 3 things that they can start doing to work on cultivating meaning in their caregiving experience. So first I wanted to share Karen. And Karen is a friend of mine who I met in undergrad at Michigan State. And Karen was diagnosed with a very rare form of cancer at the age of 21. And she passed away when she was 24. And those of us who were friends with Karen and got to know her really watched this young woman with a very wise soul walk through her journey of having cancer. And just a little bit about Karen. She wore a shirt and it had a picture of a bald person on it, and it had a red line around it with a cross that said "hair by chemo, not by choice." She loved that shirt. She started the Michigan State University Cancer Support Network. She was from Connecticut, and when she came back to school after getting treatment, she realized that she felt very different, but that the peers that she had around her couldn't always share the depth or the meaning of her experience with her. And so she started the Michigan State Cancer Support Network to connect other cancer survivors so that they could talk with one another and share their experiences and really support one another through that journey. Before she passed away, Karen listed out a very long list of her dreams. One of those was to get a dog. You see pictured here, her dog Honey, quite the wild child. But Karen's joy was that dog. She wanted to go on Oprah. She wanted to go on a cruise. She wanted to connect all of her family and friends in Connecticut with her friends and family in Michigan. And so there were just some really incredible things that she was able to accomplish as a 24-year-old also battling cancer. She was in school for social work. She wanted to become an oncology social worker. And so the night before Karen died, I was sitting at her bedside saying goodbye to her. And, we shared what our friendship had meant to one another. And she said to me, I'm not afraid of dying, but I really want to know that my life was meaningful, that it meant something. And that I was 21 at the time, but that really struck me and has guided both my personal and professional choices throughout my career, is that young woman sitting there who had done so much the night before she passed away saying, I just want to make sure that my life was meaningful. And so that's really where this talk comes from, is that conversation. Not only was Karen's life meaningful, but reflecting her story in this presentation is meaningful, and helping others find their purpose is meaningful. So I wanted to share Karen with you. So I'm using this word, and I'm realizing that we may not all have the same definition of the word meaning. So what is it when I say this word? What is it that I'm really talking about? So meaning is defined both as a noun, so as a thing, it's the end, purpose, or significance of something, kind of like how Karen was using it, the purpose of her life, the significance of her life. But also it's an adjective. So thinking tonight about cultivating meaning, and we're going to talk a little bit down the road about cultivating meaning going forward, it's an intentionality, it's expressive, it's an action, it's something that we can do, something that we can work on. And so I'm using the word in those two ways. So when I talk about meaning, the person who comes to mind is Viktor Frankl. And I just love this quote. Meaning is unique to each person. It cannot be created or given. It must be discovered. And this goes back to those core beliefs that I shared at the beginning. Meaning is so personal to each one of us. And it's not something that we can give to another person or define for another person. It's something that we define for ourselves, and it also evolves over time. So Viktor Frankl created a therapy. It's a form of therapy called logotherapy, and logotherapy is a scientifically based school of psychotherapy based on the belief that the search for meaning, even amidst misery, can constitute a potential solution to human suffering. Viktor Frankl himself was a Holocaust survivor. And so this logotherapy that he developed was developed in his time in the concentration camps, and going through that experience and realizing that cultivating his own meaning through that experience really helped him get through it. Now, tonight I'm not talking about logotherapy as a form of therapy, although it certainly is one. I'm really talking about it as a basis of understanding our own lives, more of a philosophical approach to it. Now, meaning can also be found by creating a work, loving someone, or adopting a modified attitude toward inevitable suffering. Now, this is language that's taken off the Viktor Frankl website, which I have cited in a few pages. And the reason I wanted to highlight this is especially this past year, as we've gone through COVID-19, we've all had to dig very deep to get through what's been an especially difficult time. And I think for a lot of us, made even more so because we don't know how long it's going to continue. So we ended up with our lives kind of being flipped over all at once, and then we had no idea how long all of this is going to go on, and we still don't. We're still kind of in the midst of it. And so, this was a time where we weren't able to share this experience with friends or family. We weren't able to see them. There were a lot of caregivers I knew who weren't able to visit their loved ones in a skilled nursing facility, or they had to wear a mask, and that was confusing or scary to their loved ones. For me, I love nothing better than going to a movie. And I've said so many times over this past year, I wish I could just go to a movie theater. I would love to just turn it all off, go sit in a dark theater and be entertained for a few hours. And that's not something I've had access to. And so this is just this logotherapy, or finding meaning through COVID, is a way of really deepening our experience, because I think we've all seen throughout this time of COVID, what's become most important to us may not have been as apparent in February of 2020 as it is now. Seeing friends that we haven't seen, going to work, or being able to go to an amusement park or to a concert, or the things that we enjoy. We know a little bit more now about what's most important to us than we perhaps did in 2019. There's some core principles of logotherapy. And the first is that each person is a unique and irreplaceable human being whose existence is characterized by freedom of choice, personal responsibility, and a human spirit. Goes back to that idea that each one of us has our own unique idea of what makes a meaningful life for us. There's three basic concepts involved in logotherapy. The first being freedom of will. We're free to choose how we respond to life, and we're personally responsible for those choices. It's not always the easiest thing to hear or to live with, and we're going to talk a little bit more about that in a little bit. But that freedom of will, where we're able to really look at a situation and then make our own choice of what we make out of that. The second core principle is that will to meaning. We are motivated to find meaning, and when this search is thwarted, we experience a frustration and feeling of meaninglessness. I think, going back to this past year with COVID, I think there has been that kind of existential frustration, if you will, of, what is my life if I can't do these things or see these people or go to these places that I've always been to. We've had to really dig deep to work through those frustrations. And I would say that this was I'm getting lost in my notes here, but this was true for me as I worked through this past year trying to define my own life, working toward starting my own business and working with caregivers, and changing that business model as COVID-19 kind of popped up. Really had to work at understanding what the meaning was of what I was doing. And that third one is meaning of life, which is a rather large concept. We're called moment to moment to answer the demands that life places on us. No one knows that more than a caregiver. The focus is not on what we feel we deserve from life, but rather what our responsibility is to give life. Now there's a shift. Usually we're focused on what we can't do, and this logotherapy is asking us to really look at what meaning are we giving to it, our own responsibility. We have the ability and the ultimate necessity to self-transcend in order to improve humanity. So in other words, we have our own ability to look at these things and make our own meaning from it that's individualized to each of us. There's several resources available to us. The ability to learn from our mistakes, allowing us to adapt to new circumstances. In that adaptation, we're able to make meaning from that experience. Our conscience, which is giving us the ability to take a stand for things we believe in or against things we think are wrong. Our passion for a cause, allowing us the potential to create lasting change in the world. And the ability to love others, helping us move beyond ourselves. Meaning can be found through three areas, and these are in creations, things that we create. For me, a way that I make meaning is through photography. So as Kelly shared in the beginning, and as you've seen throughout the presentation, I'm a photographer. And so I make meaning out of looking at the world around me and creating pictures from what I see. And I purposely chose this picture of a tree for this slide because I'm looking up at the tree as opposed to standing and looking at it from a distance. And I think that gives me a unique perspective that I might not have otherwise. Now I'm blessed in California to have all these amazing and beautiful trees around. So you may not have trees this large where you live, but certainly standing underneath and looking up will give you a much different perspective. Other ways that I create meaning are through poetry, connection to friends and family, and keeping stories of loved ones alive. So sharing the story of Karen with you, sharing the story of my grandmother with you, that keeps meaning in my life. The second area is through experiences. So essentially, this is what we take from the world, things that we experience from within the world. Ways that I've cultivated meaning are places that I've lived and worked. I'm originally from the Midwest, moved to San Francisco, Santa Cruz area in 2000. Certainly a very different experience from living in the Midwest, and then moved south to Santa Barbara, California just a few years ago. All of those experiences have brought meaning to my life. There's parts of my identity as a person that are certainly as a Midwesterner, but then also as someone from Santa Cruz, but very different from someone who lives in Santa Barbara. There's parts of me in each of those places that I've lived. Places that I've worked bring meaning to my life. what I have learned from each person that I've worked with, whether that's a colleague or a caregiver, and just different experiences that I've had in all of those work sites. And the third one we've talked a little bit about, and that's in attitudes. How do I label what I'm witnessing or experiencing? Is there another way to look at it? Now, journaling can help get me out of my own head. That's one way I can kind of look at my attitude and maybe choose a different way to experience it. Another, like I've shared, is looking at a familiar thing in a different way. Maybe taking a picture from a different angle. I change my view all the time to get a memorable picture. In fact, I've gotten myself in trouble a few times trying to get that classic picture and ending up in some interesting circumstances. Frankl says that being human involves exposure to the tragic triad of life, which is comprised of unavoidable guilt, suffering, and death. But in these circumstances, meaning can still be derived from the attitude we take toward the situation. I looked up some spiritual teachers that I have always followed. Nelson Mandela says, "I never lose, I either win or learn." Martin Luther King shares, "As my sufferings mounted, I soon realized there were two ways in which I could respond to my situation, either to react with bitterness or seek to transform the suffering into a creative force." And then Maya Angelou, "Please remember that your difficulties do not define you. They simply strengthen your ability to overcome." I love that. If you want to find out any more about Viktor Frankl, his book is Man's Search for Meaning. And this is a book that I read years ago, and it's a concept that has stayed with me throughout my career, throughout my life. And I definitely recommend this book if this is an area that's of interest to you. So kind of moving forward, you might be wondering, well, I'm a caregiver, so how do I make meaning in my family caregiving experience? How can we take Frankl's work and use it to inform how we cultivate finding meaning in caregiving, especially given that caregiving is a huge commitment, and it's, like I said, generally between 5 and 15 years. So meaning is going to change significantly over time. So I was on Twitter a few months ago, and I'm not a huge Twitter person, but this one really jumped out at me. And it was a caregiver who said, "Please stop telling me to take care of myself." And I stopped and I thought, oh my gosh, it really hit me. How many times have I said that to a caregiver? In the over 20 years that I've been working with caregivers, how many times have I said, "Now take care of yourself"? And it hit me how that must have felt to that caregiver to hear it, may have felt. Now, what I know about caregivers is that you have a to-do list that's a mile long, maybe 2 or 10 miles long. So if I'm telling you to take care of yourself, is that another thing on your to-do list? Is that another should that you need to get done? You should take care of yourself. And, I was well-intentioned every time I said it, but I was really feeling very grateful to this person who spoke up. And it made me stop and think to myself, what am I really saying? What's my real intention when I'm saying take care of yourself? And how could I maybe rephrase that so that it's more meaningful to that person and it doesn't end up on that person's to-do list? And so I really want to talk about self-care versus cultivating meaning. How are these two things different? Well, when I hear self-care, I tend to think of diet, exercise, drinking enough water, taking time outside, maybe getting the garden done, taking care of the animals, making sure I go for a walk in the morning, making sure I do this, making sure I do that. Wow. I'm tired just thinking about it. So sometimes self-care can be overwhelming. It doesn't feel like self-care. It feels like a should. It feels like something I should be doing. And then, oh my gosh, what happens if I don't? Then I end up feeling guilty. I didn't work out today, then I may not work out tomorrow. And then by next Wednesday, I haven't worked out for a week. And now I'm just feeling guilty on top of all the other things I'm already feeling guilty about. And so I want to move away from that idea of self-care being a should. And I want to think about cultivating meaning as a why. Why am I doing the things that I am doing? How can I reflect on the bigger picture? How can I incorporate Frankel's concepts of creation, experience, or attitude? What are some ways that I can cultivate meaning? So as I was thinking about this, one of my favorite clients of all time came to mind, and this was Roberta. Now, Roberta, when I met her, she was, I want to say she was in her late 70s. She was caring for her husband who had a very serious illness, and he needed to go out daily for treatments. And if he didn't go out for treatments, if he stopped getting them, he would perhaps pass away within a few days of not getting those treatments. So there was this real tension in her life of, at what point would they put him on hospice, looking at end of life issues and that kind of thing. But what really strikes me about Roberta when I think about her, in addition to her caregiving, she shared with me this incredibly powerful story of her experience as an executive in the entertainment industry back in the 50s. So this was a time when women were not generally in high impact roles in those organizations. They weren't sitting at the table of the board of directors. They didn't have a lot of power. And so this was a woman who was sharing with me what it was like to be sitting at those tables and to be making those decisions and to be asserting herself as a professional. And when she spoke, the joy that came over her face and the light that was in her eyes was just astounding. And I was really struck by that, because here was this powerful woman feeling powerless. She felt powerless in this caregiving situation. She felt powerless because everything that she had worked for in her career, she had given up for taking care of her husband, and she wanted to do that. She wanted to be there for him. She wanted to care for him. She wanted his last days with him, with her family, with her children, to be special. So there was no resentment in that. But she felt this tension between the powerful woman that she had been in the boardroom and this caregiver feeling powerless. And so what Roberta and I talked about was the music that she liked. And we talked about recording her life stories to share with her children and her grandchildren, and writing those stories down, or getting a video camera and talking about those experiences in the boardroom and what that was like for her. We talked about going for walks, while her husband was out getting treatment or taking a nap. We talked about, she really was somebody that felt very connected to nature. And so we talked about how to take those opportunities that she had to get outside and to do that. We talked about having her priest come to her home because she and her husband were no longer able to attend church. And so we talked about what that might be like and how she could stay connected to her congregation when she couldn't actually be there to worship with them in person. And so those were things that Roberta was able to incorporate into her life over time. And I believe found a deeper sense of meaning in that caregiving as a result. And those weren't things that we put on a to-do list for self-care. We didn't say you need to go for a walk every day and you need to write your stories down. Those were things she wanted to do. Those were things that gave her energy, that brought light to her eyes. Those were things that gave meaning to her. And so Roberta popped into my mind immediately as I was putting together this talk. Now, another caregiver also came to mind, and this story may make me tear up. I remember the impact of hearing this woman's story for the first time. We were having a caregiver retreat, and we were doing a journaling workshop. And this woman wrote a poem, and she'd been a fairly quiet participant, so we didn't hear a lot from her. And she, was kind of in her corner, and you could tell she was enjoying the writing. She was, writing prolifically there in the corner. And when we got to the end and we asked people who wanted to share to go ahead and read, whatever they had written, she'd written this amazing poem. And the poem told a story of how her husband, who she was now caring for, had always gotten her roses. He'd gotten her roses throughout their dating, throughout their relationship, to celebrate her birthday, to celebrate anniversaries. And those were always very special to her, that he went and he picked out those roses and he brought them home. And when he started to become ill and have memory issues, he forgot to buy the roses. And so those were times that really stuck out to her, as not only was he now forgetting her birthday or her anniversary or those things, but the roses that had brought them both so much joy weren't a part of that experience. And she really talked about the loss of that and what that felt like in her poem. But then she had an idea one day where she decided to take her husband out for a drive. He loved to go for rides. Those are things that he still enjoyed and they could still do together. She took her husband out to pick out roses with her, and they started to look for roses together. And they would go into stores or into nurseries or flower shops, and he would help her pick them out. And true, it was no longer him picking them out and surprising her by bringing them home, but there was a new joy and a new experience that they were having in choosing those roses together. But the last line of this poem is what really, really is such a memorable part of this story for me. So one day she was with her husband and she'd taken him into a flower shop and they picked out roses. And she was sharing with the clerk that she and her husband had always, her husband had always brought roses home to her, but he had memory problems. And so they were there together. And the clerk said to her, well, but he doesn't even remember you. And she stopped and she looked at him and she said, yes, but I remember him. I remember him. She was able to find meaning in that experience and bring a new experience and a new energy to their relationship by doing that together. She had everyone, including me, in tears at the end of that story. So before I move on, I want to just take a moment to honor Roberta and this caregiver with the roses and think about them as we move into this next section, where I'm going to really ask us all, everyone on this call or everyone listening later, to really think about how to apply these experiences in our own life. So maybe take out a notebook and a pen or a piece of paper, or if you're on a tablet or you have your phone nearby, you can write notes on your cell phone. Take a minute. Think of 3 ways that the concept of cultivating meaning in your own life goes beyond self-care. What are 3 ways that you can cultivate meaning, that cultivate the why as opposed to the what? I'll just give everybody a few seconds to think of a couple things. I'd love to see any responses in the chat, if anything's coming to mind. 3 ways that you can start cultivating meaning. As a reminder, Frankl talked about those 3 ways as a creation, an experience, or an attitude. Moving on to the next question. questions to ask yourself, knowing that these answers can and will change over time. How have I already cultivated meaning in my own life? I know for all of us, there's already ways that you're doing this. What are 3 of the most meaningful things that you're doing right now that you want to keep doing? And why is that important to you? And then the last question I have is, moving forward, what are some ways that you can make meaning of your caregiving experience? And how will you or can you continue to cultivate that meaning over time? I love this quote by David White. You know, the antidote to exhaustion is not really rest. The antidote to exhaustion is wholeheartedness. And then finally, when you change the way you look at things, the things you look at change. Now, I want to finish this presentation with a poem. And this is actually a poem written by a dear friend and a trainer, someone who is very dear to me. The poem is called "I Dedicate This Day." And I know she's on the call, so it's making me tear up a little bit. I dedicate this day. With the gift of a dedication, a modest meal becomes a feast. The simplest words, a poem. A child's carefree sketching, treasured art. So how about a day like this one? By rising above my own petty concerns and granting this day a purpose, can I transform the humble offering of my time, my work, and deeds into something noble, something worthy of another day of precious living? For I don't want to exist as if in some mindless entanglement in a meaningless world. I want to work myself like a silken thread in a web to which I belong. By dedicating this day, I want to open the door around my heart, to draw wide the curtain of my being, so that this day may become a window upon which the bird of purpose may perch and even sing. Dedicated to the memory of Gandhi, I will walk in peace. With Mother Teresa in mind, I will look my fellow man in the eye. Devoted to Anne Frank, I will hold a high, steady torch of hope. Inspired by Dr. King, I might even dare to dream. Dedicated to vision, who knows what I might see? To listening, who knows what I might hear? Depending on the purpose I bestow upon it, this day may become a bridge to friendship, medicine for an old wound, or an orchard bearing the fruit of my labor. The day that has not been anointed with purpose is like a bird with no sky, a fish with no stream, a lantern unlit. But when I dedicate my day, I am an arrow shot from a steady bow. I am an eagle in spirited flight. I am a candle whose flame blossoms with light in my own small corner of time. This day will come and go whether or not I make of it a gift. I can pray that it goes well, or I can choose to pray in a medium far more powerful than words. I can imbue them with the promise. I choose to dedicate this day. How will you choose to dedicate your days? How will you choose to make meaning? It's up to you. I would love to stay in touch. After this talk, you can find me on the web at KW Reflections. And I've really appreciated this opportunity to talk with you this evening. Thank you.
Thank you, Kendra. Thank you so much for sharing of yourself. Thank you for sharing your stories. Thank you for introducing us to your friends, Karen and Roberta. And thank you for the way in which you shared their lives with us. Thank you. Thank you. Absolutely.
I echo
Tremendous.
that. And Kendra, I was in tears too,
Mm.
listening. taking in everything, thinking about what you said, cultivating the why in our meaning. And I know it's touched a number of you out there. Are there any thoughts or questions, or perhaps even as Kendra, you challenged everyone here tonight to, dedicate your day. How are you going to dedicate your day? Kendra, one of the things that struck me as you were sharing, and I made a note of it, was, I'm going home next week to care for my parents. And my dad, as you were talking about the story about the roses, although he's not, far along in memory loss, he's physically unable to do things he used to do. And he called me to ask me if I wouldn't please get Mom a bouquet of roses. I'm going to cry now too from that story, because that's what he gave her every year. He can't do it anymore. But that's my meaning to fulfill his wish.
Yep.
So thank you for that.
Thank you for sharing also.
Yeah.
It is those things that bring us so much joy, and his being able to reach out to you and to knowing that you, his daughter, can help him continue to bring that gift to your mom. That's amazing that you can bring that gift to both of them.
Like you said, it's not a to-do list thing. It's very different.
Mm-hmm.
Yep. Someone commented in the chat that the difference between, Denise commented in the chat, the difference between cultivating meaning and self-care is so very profound and so important. And I think I would absolutely agree, Denise. And I think that's what you pointed out so much, Kendra, is that it moves from being just something you have to do into that that you don't have to do it, but it actually gives you energy in it, and it gives you purpose and fulfillment, and how much strength there is in that as it moves into cultivating meaning. And I love that word, cultivating, meaning beyond just another thing to do.
Mm-hmm.
And your examples highlighted that so well.
Thank you.
Yeah.
I think I neglected to mention Denise Bissonette is actually the author of the poem that I wrote.
Oh, well, thank you, Denise.
Hey, Denise, thank you.
And if we had more time, I was going to ask you to reread the poem, but I'm like, no, I can go back and listen to it when it's not there again. That was absolutely, absolutely beautiful. I love the way that Denise, you pulled in the different examples of Mother Teresa or Martin Luther King, and just absolutely astounding. So that's where I wanted to go back and listen to it again. So, which I will do. Made a note of that too. Yeah.
Well, and Denise added that it made her realize that caregiving is actually soul work.
Yeah. Yeah.
Indeed.
Kendra, one of the things that, meaning you were talking about creations, experience, and attitudes. Attitude may be one of the most difficult because it requires a shift and adjustment. Can you kind of share a few things that have helped you on the attitude front?
Sure. One of the things that kind of comes to mind when I first meet caregivers, a lot of times their loved one hasn't gotten a diagnosis for their memory impairment. It can be very challenging to distinguish someone's personality from someone's memory impairment. And so my grandmother, for example, was someone she was very anxious all of her life. And so when she started to have memory problems, she really started to have some behavior challenges. And so is that grandma being grandma, or is that grandma with a memory impairment? And so, some of the things and I love her dearly, but some of the things she did would really just kind of, set you on edge. And I really had to look at my own attitude toward it, of like, how else could I think about what she's experiencing? How else could I think about what I'm experiencing? Understanding the different experiences within that. There's a grief, when you're caring for someone with a memory impairment, and they're not who they've always been, kind of understanding the feelings that you're having and kind of shifting your attitude and softening toward yourself and not judging yourself for really just wanting them to be the way they were. So I think there's many ways to shift your attitude and to take something that maybe seems concrete and soften your way toward it and try to look at it from a different angle. Maybe, metaphorically speaking, instead of looking at that tree head on, go stand underneath it and look up.
That's
Exactly.
beautiful. And I do realize that we're down to our last couple minutes. So while I'm bringing up the remainder of the slides, Kelly, would you mind sharing some of the additional comments in the chat box that have come in?
Absolutely. Just Kendra, the thank yous that are coming in from people, and just the Victoria commented, a perspective to change my thinking as working for soul and not work. So just that idea of really, again, changing your perspective and ways to engage and lift up our souls as we're doing this. So thank you, Kendra. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Kendra. What a blessing you've been to us tonight. And I think for quite a while, we're going to take all of this with us and carry it forward. Thank you.
My absolute pleasure. Thank you.
Exactly. Thank you. And just as we're looking forward, we have speakers lined up through May and into June, as we have Carlos speaking about art and the beauty of caring going forward. And then going into June, we have Bill Clark speaking with us about caregiving and the power of prayer. So two really additional, continuing with some really great topics and really great speakers. So very excited for that. And always you can find resources on our website, nourishforcaregivers.com, where we have more resources and ways to support you as you're going through your caregiving. So thank you for joining us. We appreciate it. And also our book, The Caregiver Companion, is available through Amazon and Ave Maria Press, our publishers. So great summer book read as we're almost moving in towards summer now. And Kendra, a couple of times had talked about journaling, and that's what the Caregiver Companion is, an opportunity to journal as you're reflecting on your caregiving days. So again, we thank you for coming and joining us, and have a blessed evening, everyone.
Thank you all for being here.
Thank you.
Thank you. And thank you again, Kendra.
Thank you.
All right. Good night, everybody.
Good night.